So I'll start with a story. My first experience of having church outside of church was when I was a teenager. It was Sunday morning, a winter morning, and we went normally to a very small country church. But on that morning, we'd been warned by the electricity company that they'd be doing work in the region, and that would mean no electricity into the church, which meant no heat. And the snow was really deep. Well, we could have canceled, but we decided instead to move the whole thing to the farmhouse of Flora and Bessie Elliott, because they had a big kitchen with big windows and a big table, and that was all we needed. Oh, and it had a wood stove, I shouldn't forget that. And I remember so much about that morning. I remember people huddled around that kitchen table in every kind of chair, or sitting on the kitchen counter, or leaning against the door frame. I remember the warmth of the room, and I remember, because I stayed for lunch afterwards, I remember there was an awkward stranger who ambled in. And he was strange to me, but he wasn't strange to Flora and Bessie. You see, because what happened was after the men in the family had died, they really learned to rely on the help of their neighbors to get the essential work done. And I remember being served peas for lunch and being told those peas were 120 years old. Now, what that means, actually, is not that the peas were 120 years old, but Flora and Bessie's parents, when they were just newlywed, had come over from England, and they'd brought peas with them, and they'd planted them in the ground. And then in the fall, someone harvested them, as they had every year since, and had saved some aside and dried them to plant the next spring, and someone had planted them in, and so every year there was something to harvest. And that's what we were having for lunch. I have thought about that morning 1,000 times. Thought about that morning when the power company said there would be no power in our church. But instead, that was the day that I discovered something deeper and richer than I had ever seen in our tiny congregation. I sometimes think that's the only story I have to tell. Because ever since, I have been tracking the reality that I glimpsed that day through all kinds of expressions of church. Because what I learned that day was that church could go all day. And I don't mean that we had to sit around and sing and pray and all of that, but that church was as much in the lunch as it was in the Eucharist. That church was in that stranger who came in the door, and it turned out he wasn't a stranger at all, because he had something that he was bringing to that place, and he felt at home there, and he told me I was the stranger. Because church was in the work of people's hands to draw something up from the ground that we were standing on. Because church is what we do to pattern our lives together into something holy. And I've been tracking that church all over the place through some really interesting spots. So I've lived as a monk and a farmer in communities of people who, out of the wild hope that living together and praying together and working together, we can find something a little bit more sensible than what's on offer in the rest of our culture. These are incredible communities. This is happening right now. Call it new monasticism or intentional community, call it what you will. There is something that is very alive and certainly beautiful that is happening, and that is church in our world. I've caught glimpses of it too in parish picnic. That starts out as worship on someone's back lawn and then swiftly becomes lunch together, and then all the kids and the dogs are piling into the river, because you can do that in rural ministry. And you can do that when you realize that inviting people in, bringing faith home, and making that the place where people gather is a way that we can learn church and do church and be church. I had a classmate when I was at the theological college. He was studying for the priesthood, but his wife was in a bit of a tailspin because she was really new to this whole Christianity thing. And so I asked her one time, well, how are you learning about it? Like, how are you learning about church and Christianity, all this stuff? She said, honestly, the best way to learn about Christianity is to live with a Christian, right? She's on to something. I mean, the roots of discipleship might be when we sit together in rows like this, dressed in our Sunday best, but I'm beginning to doubt that. The roots of discipleship might be in programs and studies. They might be. But there's something else. Because church is what we do to pattern our lives together into something holy. I think we've got to get in underneath the roofs of each other's houses. And that's going to take some creativity. I guess it used to be that we could trust that faith would be inherited in the family household. I don't think that's happening so much anymore. And I think that calls us to imagine new ways that we can share the roofs that we've got of our homes, that we can get underneath the roofs of each other's homes, because there's something waiting there. There's something waiting there. There's a church that is so, so close to home. Thank you.